All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Today I'll be doing my preview and prediction for a pretty big matchup going down in the Big 12 this Saturday between Texas Tech and Colorado. Both of these teams find themselves in the hunt for an appearance potentially in Arlington, which would also come with, a playoff bid if you can win that game. So major matchup going down in Lubbock, Texas, at Jones AT&T Stadium. You look at the spread, 3.5 in favor of the Buffaloes, 62.5 is the total, 4 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. Starting with the Colorado offense, this is a team that's certainly one of the tougher ones to defend due to what they have in the passing attack. And of course, it starts with Shedeur Sanders, 323 yards per game, completing a little over 73%, along with 21 touchdowns. Davis has 6 interceptions, but for the most part, does a very good job of protecting the football, being proficient and accurate with the football as well. It's something that we've already known about Shedeur for a long time, but this year he's just continued to be a great player for them. And he has not been too bad really outside of the Nebraska game. Other than that, he's been very sound, 300 plus yards in most of these games. In the game against Kansas State even, he had almost 400 yards in that one. So this is a guy who's been a tremendous leader for this offense. Of course, it's much easier when he has a tremendous group of weapons to throw it to. Of course, you start with Travis Hunter at the top of the Heisman race so far with 60 receptions, 757, and 8 scores. Well, Jonte Wester has 501 yards and 7 touchdowns, really emerging as that number 2. Jimmy Horn, he's a bit of a speedster, 33 reps for 434 yards. He's pretty quiet for a good portion of the season. His best games came all the way back in week 1, and then 2 weeks ago against Cincinnati. In between that, you've been struggling to find consistency, and he hasn't even scored since August. So Jimmy Horn, though, this is a guy who can break out at any moment. And then Will Shepherd, he's also had some better games. A guy who I think is immensely talented. Really started to find his footing a little bit more. Only had one grab against Cincinnati, but other than that, this is a guy who has almost 400 yards on the season, 3 touchdowns. I think this is one of the top receiving groups in America, if not the best foursome in the nation. Going up against the Texas Tech secondary that's not the greatest. They give up a lot of big plays, a lot of yards. They're certainly going to look to attack them downfield. And I've noticed the last couple of games for Colorado, they've started it with bangs. I look at I've watched a couple of their games as of late. The first play is like a 40 or 50-yard bomb that they complete. So they get things going in a hurry. They don't hesitate one bit to, throw this rock around. They do it with a lot of precision. Almost 38 pass attempts per game from Shedeur. They're just incredibly tough to slow down because of how much they do chuck the rock and how good this quarterback is with guys that are usually open if he has some time. And speaking of having, potential opportunities downfield, it's mainly because of what this offensive line can do. Jordan Seaton at left tackle. It's a big struggle for anybody as a true freshman in college football at that position. And early on, he didn't look that great. No worries there. As times went on, he's been a lot better. And I certainly think this is an opportunity where he's going to continue to showcase his prowess. On the interior, Tyler Brown, he's been giving out a lot of pressures, but not as many sacks this year. Hank Zelinskis at center, really just an average player, nobody that's all that great. Right guard, Khalil Benson, I think he's a good veteran, but he's also never been all that great, and he's allowed a couple of sacks this season. And I think Phillip Houston at right tackle is a bit of a liability. So, they've tried different things out on this offensive line, but those guys right there are the main ones you have to look at. And that's the biggest problem with Colorado, 117th nationally in sacks allowed. That number certainly has gotten better, coming off a great game in pass pro against Cincinnati, though. So this offensive line starting to find their footing a little bit. Kareem Harden was at right guard in the last game. He had a pretty splendid effort. And then Justin Mayers, him and Tyler Brown have been rotating at left guard. So, the pass protection overall against the Bearcats was very sound. Certainly not the toughest defense outside of Dante Corleone. They don't have too many guys that can really get into the backfield. So this will be, a similar test that's not all that great for Texas Tech up front either, even though their defensive line has also been playing to a higher tune, so you're starting to get, best on best here. The Buffalo's O-line still not really, a reliable unit, even though they have had some respectable outings. The run game's really not much of a factor still. The last couple of games, though, they've been better, 128 yards against UCF. They had some bright spots in that one on about 40 carries in each of the last 2 games, though they had under 150 yards. So they've had a little bit more consistency. It's not been as bad as it was certainly last year. They had negative 29 yards rushing against Kansas State because of how many times they got sacked. So the run game is, adding a little bit more balance. Certainly not something that's going to scare an opponent, but against the Texas Tech defense, you certainly might be prone to allow some big plays. Isaiah Augusta, he's really taken over as the lead runner. Michael Welch has been banged up. Charlie Orfadal, he's played in every game. He doesn't even have 100 yards yet. So this running back room is really not all that talented. Outside of Dalton Hayden, the Ohio State transfer, he's also battled injuries early on in the season. He does have 30-plus yards, 3 out of the last 4 games, which, again, that's a pretty respectable number for what we're working with. So Colorado certainly having a more balanced approach, but it's getting from the start to the finish. That's how they're going to win games. That's how they're going to lose games. So they have a great passing attack led by Shadur and those receivers. Offensive line, they'll need to continue to showcase that they can, bring a little bit of balance to the table, be better pass pro, and, they'll have a lot of success. Now we shift to a Texas Tech offense, one led by Zach Kitley, air raid specialist. They've had great balance in every single game this year. Put up 455 in the big loss to Baylor. Blew it against TCU, where they almost had 450 in that one as well. And against Iowa State, less than 400 yards against a very tough defense, but they were able to get the job done at the end of the day. And we'll start with a passing attack. Baron Morton, this is a guy who has a good bit of experience now in this system, 255 yards per game, 37 attempts per contest, obviously in the air raid. It's a lot of short, quick throws, a lot of patterns that certainly attack defenses in that short to intermediate range. He's got 19 touchdowns and 5 picks. This is a veteran quarterback I'd be confident in this spot. For potential Big 12 championship looming, if they can go ahead and take care of business the rest of the way. In a game like this that will be big for that resume. Texas Tech is a nice quarterback here in Morton. His completion percentage, under 60%, 3 out of the last 4 games. So they're not really showcasing great efficiency, but this is something they need to get back on track. And I know Colorado's gotten a lot better with their pass defense, but I remember back in week 1 against North Dakota State, that's the exact area they struggled in, shockingly, was in the short to intermediate range, giving up a lot of completions early on in the season. So it seems like if Texas Tech can kind of bring that out of them from what they saw early on in the season from a defensive standpoint, they can be potentially more efficient. And I like what they have a receiver. And Josh Kelly, the Wazoo transfer has been great. 736 and 5 scores. Caleb Douglas, on the other hand, right behind him, 44 receptions for 594 and 4 touchdowns. Those are going to be your 2 go-to guys. Coy Aiken, a sophomore player, has got over 400 yards and the team-high 6 scores. And then Jalen Conyers, I think he's a good tight end despite some pretty limited production. So Texas Tech, they have plenty of different guys here. Micah Hudson, a 5-star, really hasn't gotten involved too much this year. Jordan Brown had a big catch against Iowa State to set them up for the game-winning touchdown. So, they have a handful of different guys, but the top 3 I mentioned are going to be the ones that Morton looks for often. Those guys play a lot of reps. I certainly think that they're going to be, able to have nice productive games, because I think those are, 3 really good receivers. Then you look at the run game, Taj Brooks, this guy has played in 8 contests this year, didn't play against Washington State, 100-plus rushing in every single game this year. He's played some pretty tough defenses as well, coming off 122 yards and a score. He has 10 of them on the year against Iowa State. This is a volume runner because he's not hit 200 yards yet this year. He gets 25 attempts per game. If I had to guess, I think that's probably first in the country. So he's a workhorse. He's a guy who gets a lot of work, but he's a good running back at the end of the day. Has 13 receptions, but not much of a factor in the run game at 200, or the passing game, that is, at 230 pounds. So Taj Brooks and these receivers, this is a really good supporting cast, but again, it's going to come down to efficiency and just being able to move fast and have completions. And I think that's something they potentially might be able to accomplish in this game. Looking at their offensive line, I think it's a pretty good unit for Texas Tech. They're obviously very sound in pass protection. You look at left guard, they've had a handful of different guys at that position. Sterling Porcher, he's the main starter. Had a pretty good game against Iowa State, but for the year he's been pretty abysmal. At left tackle, Ty Buchanan, he's a veteran. He's pretty good as well. Sheridan Wilson at center, and then right guard Davian Carter. They're going to be the best players on this offensive line. And then Caleb Rogers over right tackle. He's also doing quite well. Overall, in terms of pass protection, this is a pretty sound O-line. Over there, in the middle, and then that right side, I think they're certainly very strong. But on the left side, I think they're more vulnerable. Colorado doesn't exactly possess the deepest of pass rushes, but they do have plenty of linemen, and they have plenty of guys that I think they feel confident in being able to rotate. Because Texas Tech, they're going to play 70, 80-plus snaps of offense, and you want to try to wear down your opponent. I think Colorado in the trenches certainly won't be phased in that regard, and they're pretty sound on the interior as well. I think there's mismatches here that they can look to take advantage of. But again, this is a good offensive line. It's an air raid attack that, they like to, operate from big plays, and they also like to have, 15-play drives where they are moving fast in a hurry with good efficiency. Now you look at a Colorado defense, it's much improved coming into the year. And, look at the pass rush that, sometimes shows up, sometimes doesn't. They have 22 sacks on the year, respectable number for what they had last year. BJ Green, I think, is probably their best edge rushing presence. Samuel Okunlola as well. Those are 2 good guys I think they can certainly lean on to try and generate some pressure. The other guys they have, Amari McNeil, Shane Copes, these guys are having good seasons. Chidozie Nwankwo, I think he's a phenomenal run stopper in the middle. He's been a great player for them. Arden Walker as well. And, there's a couple of other names in this defensive rotation, guys like Anquan Barnes, Torquay Thomas, and, guys that aren't all that great. But I'd say this is a unit that, again, can play 70 or 80 snaps because I think they're going to be able to have some pretty solid rotation. But the lack of pass rush is certainly something that could become an issue, especially against a team that loves to air it out, and, they do it in a hurry. 7 sacks, though, against Arizona, so they certainly significantly boost that number. Had 4 against Kansas State. So that's pretty good. They're doing a lot better than they were early on in the season, but they went back down to only 1 against Bearcats, so more of an inconsistent pass rush, but a team I think does pretty well in terms of stopping the run. Significantly improved in this regard. They had a terrible run defense a season ago. They have not allowed over 200 yards once this season, but they have allowed 100 plus in every game. Very good improvement, though, at the end of the day from Colorado. This is exactly what you'd expect to see from the Buffalo's defense, especially with all these new additions, and I think it's mainly because of the improvements at linebacker. You look at guys like Nakia Hill-Green. He's been great, especially against the run. He does have 17 missed tackles, though. Isn't great in coverage. And neither is Levante Bentley, but he's pretty good at slicing gaps and stopping the run. So, you're getting quality play from your backers at the end of the day. And last year, you just didn't see quality play from really anybody. So I think that's certainly important for this Colorado defense and why they've been much better against the run. They're overwhelming the line of scrimmage, and the linebackers are there to make plays or at least make some type of contact. But in coverage, again, they're big liabilities against this scheme. It's pretty complex, and they've not faced one like this really, I don't think that much in Deion Sanders' tenure. So this will be a much different approach here facing Texas Tech. And I think that these guys are certainly built for being able to slow down Taj Brooks. It seems like he's a given to get 100, 150 plus yards. But limiting the big plays, and they've been doing that a lot this year, is going to be the key to this contest. They've allowed 10 rush touchdowns as well. But pretty happy with what they've accomplished in that regard. You look at the secondary, I alluded to early on in the season. They weren't doing very good in terms of allowing a lot of completions and a lot of efficiency. Since then, they've been very good. Less than 60% for the most part, 62.5% that is on the year in terms of opponent completion rating allowed. Against pretty formidable opponents, too. Arizona can hurt you. Cincinnati, Kansas State, the last couple of games. They've been very good against the pass. I certainly think that, having Travis Hunter out there is going to be a big reason why. He's going to play a lot of snaps as he always does, but, Texas Tech playing 70 to 80 plus reps, and they're probably going to have, at least 60 plays of their own on offense. Will he play the entire game? I imagine he will, but if he's not, there's certainly opportunities to strike downfield. I don't think Colton Hood's all that good of a replacement corner. DJ McKinney's having a pretty good year at his cornerback spot. The transfer veteran coming over from Oklahoma State. Preston Hodge, he's a guy that's really been their worst player in coverage. He's not a good tackler either. He's not been very efficient in that regard. He's going to be, likely manning the slot for them as he's been doing all year long. But they certainly need more consistency out of him. And then at safety, having Shiloh Sanders back is great. This is a guy that I really like in terms of physicality, being able to make plays against the run. Hasn't been the best player since coming back from injury. Still trying to get back into the rhythm of things. So that might lead to guys like Carter Stroudemeyer getting on the field more. Cameron Selman Craig, of course, he's a veteran, was at Jackson State. He came over and he's having a big-time impact for this defense as the leading tackler with 61 stops. So overall, this is a Colorado defense. It's not exactly a pushover by any means because they really haven't struggled all that much in too many games this year. More than just a normal level, I guess you could say, of struggle against guys like Nebraska, North Dakota State, whatever. It's been a pretty normal defense this year, pretty average unit. But again, this is a complex scheme. That'll be interesting to see how they approach. And of course, Hunter's snap count as well will be something to monitor. Now we move to a Texas Tech defense coming off some better outings last couple of weeks, including, beating Iowa State on the road 23-22. Still gave up 432 yards in that game, but anytime Iowa State got into plus territory, they just forgot how to play ball. Texas Tech was really able to limit them in that regard because they had opportunities throughout the game to score, and they just held them to field goals almost every single time, it seemed like. You start with the run defense, a group that is certainly iffy from time to time, and we don't expect Colorado to really overwhelm you by any means. But when you're this bad at times, they can certainly lose to anybody. 300 plus yards allowed against Washington State, 255 against Baylor, held TCU and Iowa State back-to-back road games in check for less than 140 yards each. Arizona and Cincinnati also had less than 130. And then when they played Cam Scatterbo, they held them to under 100 yards rushing. So this is certainly a revamped unit on the ground. They certainly do have those inconsistencies, though, because all the success I just labeled, they still had that Baylor game sandwiched in between there. So Texas Tech, they have a defense that I'm pretty confident in their ability to not give up any type of room on the ground to Colorado's poor rushing attack. Amari and Banks on the defensive line, a very good player for them. Braylon Carroll, another guy who's kind of been a standout. Amari and Banks, though, has not played the last couple games, and he won't play the rest of the year. So to have success without one of your top defensive linemen, I think certainly speaks volumes on a group that's showcasing some nice rotation. Harvey Dyson, Quincy Leddit, they have a lot of guys stepping up, playing more snaps. Amir Washington. I mean, nobody's really a standout, though, outside of Carroll on this defensive line. It's a unit that in the preseason, we talked about how they added a lot of transfers, and, they've been respectable, I guess, in just showing up and playing football and, putting in great effort, but no one that's really just been a game changer for them. The game changers are in the middle of this defense. Jacob Rodriguez and Ben Roberts at linebacker. I mean, these guys are just phenomenal, and, where would the Red Raiders be without them, considering how bad the defense really has been this year? Rodriguez has, both of these guys, quite frankly, have a lot of missed tackles, but they're also on the field a lot, and they have a lot of responsibilities here, and they are the top two players in terms of tackles for loss. 11 and a half of them on the year in that regard. They only have 11 sacks. Those pass rush doesn't really exist. Rodriguez has 3 of them. You got guys like Isaac Smith, Terrell Timon. They're outside linebackers. You hope can spark up a bit of a pass rush, and they do have 5 over the last 2 games. So the defense, again, they're playing much better in their front 6, front 7. But for the most part, I think they'll be able to slow down the run, but in terms of generating pass rush, I'm not sure if that's going to be evident without sending some blitzes and trying to confuse this opposing offensive line. I think that'll be your best bet of trying to get home. Of course, you look at the secondary, a guy that leads them is C.J. Baskerville. He plays a lot in the box as well. I mean, he's a versatile safety for them. He's going to be their best player. That's certainly the guy you're also going to lean on to make the most plays. At slot, A.J. McCarty, a guy that's been playing very well this year in coverage. He's not much of a run defender, though. Not that great of a tackler either. Marion Horn, Braylon Lux at corner. I mean, these guys have been playing respectable throughout the year. I think against this type of heat, though, they might struggle. But they just played some really good pass catchers in Iowa State. And then when they play TCU, they got plenty of guys that can also burn you. So it won't be the biggest shock. You certainly haven't seen a first-rounder like Hunter just yet. But these guys are going to be competitive in this game, I would say, as corners. In the secondary, and then Macho Stevenson plays a good bit. He's probably a lesser skilled guy they can look to pick on. In the safety spot, again, Baskerville paired up with Chapman Lewis, who's also been having a pretty good season. Again, this is a secondary, though. They give up a lot of big plays. They give up a lot of yards through the air. They've been improved, but they still allow over 300 yards per contest. They only allow about a 62% comp rate. Teams, though, they throw almost 40 times per game on these guys, and they looked good against Iowa State for the most part, but this is going to be a completely different challenge. Looking at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons, I think quarterback and wide receiver, clear edges in every single game for the Buffaloes, while running back Taj Brooks will also be a clear advantage. Offensive line, favor of the Red Raiders. Defensive line, I'll go ahead and stick with Colorado. It's, a bit of a deep bunch for Texas Tech as well, but again, not many real X factors you can lean on. Linebacker, great players there for the Red Raiders. I'll give them the edge. And then the secondary, Colorado, another pretty simple one to make. Look at the final thoughts in the prediction. I think keys to the game for Colorado, got to slow down Taj Brooks and keep challenging deep downfield your passing attack. They just put so much stress on opponents. It's hard for them not to get 20, 30 yards in bunches. And Texas Tech, I don't think their defense is exactly built for that, especially if you're not going to have a pass rush. And the only way for them to generate that is, send Everett looks, send some blitzes, and that's certainly an area of vulnerability where you're not going to get home every single time, I wouldn't imagine, against this quarterback. For Texas Tech, you want to maintain your balance and continue the prowess up front. I'm going to stick with Colorado in this matchup. Going on the road to Lubbock, it's going to be a tough environment. But I think just quite frankly, they're probably the better football team. I certainly think that the Colorado's going to be a little shocked, I think, by the Texas Tech scheme. I think they certainly have plenty of success, but I also think that the Buffaloes are going to be tough to slow down because, again, you don't have much of a pass rush. I don't think these corners, even though I did refer to it as a competitive matchup for them, I don't think they're going to win more than the Buffaloes will downfield. So I think Colorado's going to get the job done in this one. They're going to stay, kind of in the driver's seat. They potentially find their way into Arlington, but this is a major game. The winner of this one will be feeling pretty confident, I think, going into the rest of the year because it is a conference in complete chaos. Buffalo's getting the job done in Lubbock. Should be a good matchup. You should see plenty of offense. Another good opportunity, though, for the Buffaloes to showcase their improvements in key areas like the offensive line, like their defense all around. I think for the Red Raiders, a lot of momentum coming off a big victory. Upset after losing to TCU in a game they should have won, and they ended up blowing that one late due to injury at quarterback and just not being able to seal the deal. They turned around and went on the road and beat the Cyclones. They were previously undefeated. So that's a great win there, but I certainly don't think that's sustainable for the Red Raiders, at least on defense, especially in this matchup. That's me for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.